Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm very aware that I am standing between you and Kiddush, so I'll keep it short. I was so inspired by Zosia and Zev really taking Parsha Mishpatim as a conversation about morality and law and how we keep law, rule, and order in society. And what I was left thinking about is a dynamic of how do we really tell the difference between what's right and wrong when we live in a society where people come to not just different, but sometimes completely opposite conclusions. We are living in very polarized times. And our Torah reminds us again and again that we actually need to work towards depolarization. How do I make that claim? Well, in chapter 23, verse 2, which we heard chanted today, it says very clearly, well, not so clearly, actually. It's very clear in the English. It says, "You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty, nor shall you show deference to the poor man in his dispute." We hear a very similar thing each Shabbat morning when we read a verse from Leviticus at the early part of our service, where we say, "You shall not show deference to the rich, nor to the poor." There seems to be some desire for fairness that we are meant to strive for in society, and we're not supposed to be kind of swayed by people's social status when we think about what fairness will look like. However, even more interesting to me is that this English translation in the Eitz Chaim is a little bit different than the plain meaning of the Hebrew text. The plain Hebrew text actually says, "Lo tihya acharei rabim l'ra'ot." Don't follow after the majority to do a bad thing, i.e., don't do what everyone else is doing. You might find yourself doing the wrong thing if you're just a group follower. I was really, really struck by this because I have been thinking and reading about groupthink. I was reading a book by a journalist, Ezra Klein, who wrote something in 2020 called "Why We're Polarized." And in it, at one point, he brings a study, a social experiment by a sociologist, Henry Tajfel, who wanted to understand how groups make judgments and what it looks like actually when we try to make judgments, but we belong to a group. All of us, I think, feel like we are rational actors. And generally, when we see other people coming to different conclusions than our own, we think they're wrong and we're right. And Tajfel wanted to understand this. So he set up an experiment where he put a sample of 48 boys who were between 14 and 15 years old in a room, and he had them look at paintings and then divided them into two groups, seemingly based on who had said they liked the paintings of Kandinsky more, and the other group who liked the paintings of Klee more, two random painters. And here's the trick. The groups were actually completely random. So these two groups emerge of people thinking, oh, I'm like a Kandinsky guy. And then they're asked to do these totally unrelated sort of positioning of points to their group and to the other group. And what this experiment and others like it found again and again was, even to the detriment actually of their own success, they were more interested in serving their group and in differentiating from the other group, even though their sense of belonging was completely random. The conclusion that social scientists have built off of this experiment and experiments like them is that we actually believe and privilege our belonging over our rationality all the time. Where does that leave us? How are we supposed to do the right thing? How are we supposed to not try to win but actually try to get it right. If there's this dynamic where when we belong to a group, we privilege our group identity. So now I want to remind us again of what the Torah says. Don't incline after the majority to make a bad decision. Don't follow other people. Try to make your own choices. What's so remarkable about this verse is that it gets quoted in a different place in our tradition, completely opposite of what it says here. In a story called the Oven of Achnai, where there's a dispute between sages, the sages go back and forth with a majority saying that they think the rule is one way, and one person saying it's the other way. And that one person tries to call in a heavenly voice to prove his point. And the conclusion of the other team, the other rabbi, is, you know what? We're actually not going to let God have a say in this dispute. You are meant to follow the majority opinion. And he uses this exact verse, but he cuts off the last word, liraot. He says, follow a majority. This is incredible. This verse that you would think our notion of justice relies on, which is don't fall into groupthink, is used in a different place in our tradition to say, follow whatever the group says. That's how we keep things civil. That's how we keep things connected. That's how we stay together. What I wanted to offer this morning first is just noticing that both of these opinions seem to have a place in our tradition. And I want to conclude by really thinking about what to do with this dynamic. Is it one or the other? Is it groupthink is bad and irrational? Or, you know what, it might not be perfect, but the best we have is whatever the most of us think must be where truth resides. Looking into the way that our tradition functions, we choose not just a set of rules, but actually a process around rules. And within the Jewish process, we have a practice of preserving minority opinions. So even when we say, this is the decision that the majority has ruled, we always preserve the minority opinion. And in that way, we actually, I think, strike a middle ground between these two dynamics. We are aware, and we should be aware, that groupthink is a real thing, that it's not always rational to go with what everybody is saying is right. And the way that we moderate that isn't necessarily by being just total rejection of whatever the group thinks, but to actually instill in our people and in ourselves a sense of process, a sense of navigation between what I think and what you think. And if we think something really different from one another, we're actually supposed to work to get to a shared understanding. I think we're living in times where we would rather win than discuss. And what I wanted to share today is this voice from our tradition that says actually getting it right, that hard work of compromise, is something that we hold very, very sacred. And I hope that we can take that into the world. I hope that we can listen to our B'nai Mitzvah today who spoke with real moral clarity about the world and know that it's beautiful to say, but it's hard work to do. And it is incumbent on all of us to do the hard work of listening, bringing forth our truth, and being open to the truths of others.